Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session at Unfinished. My name is Matthew Anderson. I'm the European Culture Editor of the New York Times, and it's my great pleasure to be joined in conversation today by Adina Pintilie, the filmmaker and recent winner of the Golden Bear at the Berlin Film Festival. Adina will be known to a lot of you, I'm sure, as the director of Touch Me Not, which, as I said, took the jury prize for Best Film at the Berlin Film Festival last year. And it is a strange and an interesting film, I think. It's sort of on the cusp between a sort of fictional feature film, elements of documentary, perhaps also elements of the kind of movie that you would see in an art gallery or at a biennial. But it was certainly produced a very original mixture which impressed the jury and took the top prize there. And since then, Adina's been on a sort of whirlwind tour of international promotion here in Romania, and is now coming to the next stage of the project's life, in which she has launched an international debate tour which kind of spins off elements of the movie into a live educational experience, and that's currently touring around universities here in Romania and then going abroad from now. And the idea of that is to create what Adina has described as transformative encounters between young people and vulnerable communities. Wants to change mentalities, promote diversity and inclusion. But Adina, I thought we might start by talking about the film, because that's how it all begins. And so why don't you take us right back to the beginning and tell us how the film came about to start with?
Oh, but we have half an hour.
Yeah.
So can I do like a check here? Who of you have seen the film already? Okay, so it's quite a good coverage. And then because I'm a bit I'm cautious about getting into the story because it's long, and I've said it so many times all over Romania. Probably you also know it from Berlinale. So I won't enter into much details.
Well, rather than telling us about it in a sort of practical level of what happened,
yeah.
Why don't you take us back to the germ of the idea? What was the thinking or the philosophical basis for the movie?
The emotional push, you mean?
Yeah, well, perhaps it's better to think of it as emotional rather than intellectual.
I think so.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, it started, as I'm also saying in the film, and I said it a few times, like when I was much younger than now, I thought I had all kinds of certainties about how intimacy works, you know, how desire functions, what love is, I had all kinds of clear ideas about stuff. But then with experience, with real people, I just discovered that things are much more complex, and human nature is highly unpredictable and fascinating. So the film comes from this curiosity. I'm trying to, and all of us who've been in this project, I think, we try to kind of forget what we know from what was imprinted there by family, by education, and try to discover with a sort of open eyes, fresh look, how people really connect, how people really live this experience.
And I mean, to my mind, the way that you do that is by confronting people with things that they may think of as taboos, and you, with your audience, you work through some of those. Would that be a fair assumption, or fair sort of thing to say in terms of the film? Because certainly in terms of its reaction, people did react strongly against some of the taboos that the film explores.
If we talked about, because we started to talk a bit about the reactions that the film provoked, I'm not even sure it's about taboos. If you noticed, some of the most strong emotions were rather emotional. They were not on a very like conceptual, explicit level. Like, for example, the reaction we talked about, the Guardian one, just right after the Berlinale, was a very angry rant about something which was not explicitly about the film. So it's too simplistic to put it that it's a film which has a lot of nudity and deals with sexuality, and it's too simplistic to put it that the problem of the film is that it deals with taboos. I think there are other levels there which are very subjective for each viewer, and we didn't have the time to take like a detailed look at what's the discomfort that the film creates. But I think it has a lot to do with our education and what we perceive as shameful, or even though it's about, you know, we all have a body, we all have an intimate life. So it's a natural aspect of our life.
But you must have known going into it that putting some of the images and themes on the screen were going to make people uncomfortable. It seems to me that you wanted people to feel that perhaps and then work through that. You must have been aware of that at the beginning.
It is, I couldn't expect how the reactions would be, but it definitely has sort of a dimension of conversation. So it's definitely inviting you through the concept of the film. It's an invitation to come into the same process like we've been through. So basically we share with you as a viewer the whole process, our own discomforts, our own, as you've seen, like during the film, like Thomas is going through this whole journey. For example, when he meets Christian, he has his own borders, and then the prison, it's the walls of the prison are melting down gradually. So, and this is a process that we also share with the viewer. So from time to time, the protagonists are talking to you. So yes, it is an invitation in, but I think the reactions cannot be like foreseen totally. It's not like it's planned in that sense.
And I mean, you're a character in the film as well.
That was not planned either.
Yeah. But you are there, and you're sort of talking us through your journey as part of it as well, aren't you?
Yep. And that was quite a tough decision to make, because the plan in the beginning was to have this structure of dialogue with the viewer, of the protagonist with the viewer, without you necessarily seeing the camera or the filmmakers or the whole process behind it on screen. So this was behind the scenes, but we don't have like enough time to actually to explain how it became absolutely necessary, organically necessary, to also reveal the dispositive or the mechanism, or the emotional mechanism behind the film, because otherwise. I'm trying to explain briefly. The initial structure of the film was a sort of a classical parallel montage between the moments when you follow the experiences of the protagonists and then the moments when they share with you their feelings. And it didn't work at all. When we did the first test screenings, instead of those moments of dialogue reaching you as a viewer through a sort of a connection, they would have that Brechtian effect. They would push you out.
So you had actually made the whole film before you decided to insert yourself? It was sort of finished as... Fortunately, by the very nature of... So to be able to have this dialogue with the viewer, we had to use this thing which is called teleprompter, which is a mechanical invention. We didn't invent it. It's used by Errol Morris in his work, and it's used by television for many years. It's a device which has this emotional quality, which I was fascinated about, that when you talk to me as a protagonist, you see me in the lens. So basically, my colleagues were talking to me, so implicitly they were talking to the viewer. In a very direct way. And by the very nature of that device, the whole process was recorded, because the whole mechanism had these two cameras which were recording in parallel the whole process. So luckily, we had everything that we went through, it was recorded. It was not recorded to be in the film, it was recorded for the sake of the process, but actually it proved to be like a very alive, rich material in itself, which is sometimes much more interesting than the, let's say, the staged moments. Or I'm interested in the film explores some of the barriers that are to intimacy, to bodily intimacy, and they might be around ability, age, gender, sexuality. How did you sort of choose the ones that you wanted to speak about? Because, I mean, it struck me that it seems that you chose a lot of different of those barriers, but avoided others. For instance, I thought there was nothing really about race in the film, although you did look at other sort of important discourses. How did you decide which ones you were going to talk about?
To be honest, I didn't. To be honest, when I looked for people, I was looking for them in a very intuitive level, because the casting was quite long, and there were all kinds of people of all colors, genders. I never thought in terms of genders, colors, sexual orientations or stuff. This didn't matter. So
and you were casting non-professional actors?
Both. So it's a mix of professional actors and non-professional. So the thing is, the way we worked with the casting was very intuitive. So I was kind of looking for, I couldn't conceptualize in the beginning. It was more like looking for people which are in the same area of interest, which have the same, that I could resonate at a certain level. So it's not about necessarily them representing something. I mean, each of us, you can put me, you can click a lot of boxes in terms about me also. Like, each of us can fit a lot of boxes. You know, I'm a middle-aged woman, intellectual, whatever, click, click, click. So it's not about the boxes that we can fit into. It's about a very strong, fascinating personality that I encountered and that I resonated on a deep level in terms of this, let's say, core area of exploration, which is the everyday struggles around intimacy. So, because the film, as I told you, started from this, maybe this non-existent contradiction that you grow up with certain ideas about how things should be, but then the experience, it's sometimes really different than that. And then you think, oh, what's going on? Is something wrong with me? Is something wrong with the world? Or is it just okay, but I just didn't know it's okay? So you have all kinds of different perspectives on intimacy, which are different than what we learn that it's the way. So, and the struggle about, there is sometimes this, I think all of them, each of the protagonists, if you look at the red thread in the film, each of them deals with this tension between this need to be intimate and to be close and the sort of blockage, fear. It's Esther Perel is here, and her book was, I think she's here, I hope she's here. Hi, Esther. And her book was quite inspirational for us. I mean, we during the research, we worked with several therapists and several books on therapy that were very inspiring for us. And her work, which is inspiringly named Mating in Captivity, Reconciling the Erotic and the Domestic, as if these are two entities which cannot be reconciled, was a very inspirational book. And there is a line there, which for us it was a very, how do you say, it was like a log line of the film. Like, tell me how you loved me so I can understand how I love. So the film looks very much into the way that we've been conditioned in the way that we love and we relate to each other, and how much of the way we relate, it's free, and how much it's because you have a certain background.
And in the film, this is happening to individual characters. They're on these sort of journeys, or they're making these discoveries. But in the next phase of the project, you are taking that from a sort of individual level that takes place onto a screen and trying to make that play out in the lives of people more directly, aren't you? Tell us about what has come next for the film.
Yeah, for the film, initially our plan was to, because Touch Me Not is part of a larger project, a multi-platform project. It's a sort of an artistic research on intimacy, on the challenges of intimacy through different formats. We only made Touch Me Not, and Touch Me Not doesn't seem to end so quickly. So we want to step into the next projects of the multi-platform, but what happened now is that during the release of the film, we received a lot of invitations from universities, from different professors, teachers, academia, who found not only the film interesting, but this format of conversation, which we call Touch Me Not, the Politics of the Body, that we traveled with, which is a format where you can meet the protagonists and discuss with them directly. So basically it's like you watch the film and then they step out of the screen in the middle of the audience, and you can extend the conversation they start with you on screen. So they came all together from several universities in Romania and abroad. So then we put together a sort of a human schedule, and we created a project. We call it the University Debate Tour, Touch Me Not, Politics of the Body, which started yesterday in Timișoara. So it's going to happen between yesterday and 16th of October in 6 university cities in Romania. We come to Bucharest, by the way, with the protagonists, with the rock band on the 3rd and the 8th at Teatrul Național București. So you can have an extended discussion there, which are going to be made. I give you an example with what kind of universities invited the project in. For example, in Bucharest, we do it in partnership with it's the National School of Political Sciences, and one of the events, and the other event, it's made with the University of Bucharest with the Center for CESI, Centru de Excelență. It's Center of Excellence in Image Studies, and together.
So that's a film school.
It's basically a department of image studies. It's not film related necessarily. It's about, I think, if I am correct, it's a sort of an. It's about the impact that the visual, the image has on society, on culture. So it's very much about the connection between the visual, the collective imaginary in terms of visuality, and how it relates with society and community, and with the Society of Psychoanalysis. That's what I wanted to say, that the invitations didn't come necessarily from film, not only from film and art school, but from psychology departments or sociology departments.
So describe to us, last night in Timișoara, describe to us how the experience goes. You screen the film, and then what happens?
Well, after it starts with the screening of the film, and then you basically have the opportunity to meet Christian Bayerlein and Grit Uleman and Laura Benson, and Thomas Le Marquis is going to join us soon. And then there is the discussion. It's usually moderated by one representative of the university. In Timișoara, we had a very interesting, in my opinion, both teacher and practitioner psychologist, Mugur Ciumăgeanu, who moderated the whole conversation. Well, in Bucharest, we are going to have the pro-rector of the Political Science University, Mrs. Liniana Popescu. So for us, it's and the president, for example, of the Romanian Society of Psychoanalysis, Dr. Alfred Dumitrescu, is going to be one of the guests of the other event. So you have this different perspective on the conversation that the film is opening. It's not very much about the film anymore. It's basically the film becomes a sort of a trigger of a conversation, I think.
And I mean, does it take place in a sort of forum like this? I'm just trying to imagine how it plays out.
We thought when we received this invitation that we wouldn't like us to just be like guest lecturers, like one-sided speakers, because this was the initial idea. You come, you present the film to the students, and then you start to talk about the experience. So we thought, okay, since we do this, let's be, how do you say, consistent with the nature of the film, with the interactive nature of the film. And we proposed the universities to create a sort of an encounter, like space of encounter between the students and the communities which are, let's say, represented or connected with the film. like
And
the
so
vulnerable communities.
What are those communities there?
So we worked, for example, in Timișoara, we worked with the community of people with disabilities, or we discussed a lot about the notion of disability. I think a more correct name is people with bodies different than differently able bodies, let's say. We work with the LGBT community, with the community of people interested in personal development, alternative therapies, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis. We work with a lot of local ONGs in this respect.
And I'm interested in so the students that come along, or even the people who can't take part in that, just as the viewers of the movie, what do you want them to get out of that? Do you want to change something in them?
Well, when you quoted, you said that that's a transformative experience. Well, that's probably how you can look at it from an educational perspective. Like, it's a project which is initiated in collaboration with several universities following their initiative. I don't know if it's going to change radically something, but I think it can bring sort of a new perspective on different possibilities of humanity. We even had last night, I give you some examples. We had last night a question like, how can there be love in a fetish club? How can there be love in an SM relationship? So basically, these discussions about, there are many, especially in our education, of course it's different from culture to culture, we have certain views on good and bad and taboo and things which are socially allowed and stuff. So I think the film is bringing up a conversation which is destabilizing a bit those clear ideas.
The last scene in the movie, I don't know if everyone remembers it, but it's an amazing sort of film. It seems very hopeful, and it seems to be a message that if you can liberate yourself from some of these taboos, and there's a scene she comes out and she's naked and she like really dances and really into, I think it's Einstürzende Neubauten.
It's him, and he made an original piece for the end.
Oh really? Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And it's so it's a fantastic scene in which she seems to be so enjoying her own liberation. Is that your aim for the viewers, or for the young people that you encounter in the extension debates, that you want them to achieve something similar?
We often talked about this notion of prison and versus freedom, because I think it's a film about personal freedom, about allowing ourselves or having the courage to be the way we want to be in spite of whomever's judgment. And I think, let's say, liberation or freedom, it's a kind of utopia, like full liberation. But I think the film is about the steps that we can do to step out a bit from this. It doesn't matter if you go out, let's say, if you break down a certain wall and then you find yourself in a space where you discover another wall, it doesn't matter. So it's important, I guess, this process of kind of breaking through.
So one more question from me, and then we're going to take some questions from the floor. So do have a think if you've anything you'd like to ask Adina. But I was interested before when you talked about how how taboos, emotional blockages differ from culture to culture. And I thought that it was interesting that the film, I couldn't really say where it took place. They spoke in English, but then some of them had accents. Laura, the main character, she seemed to be British, but it was sort of unclear where this was, and it didn't seem actually to be connected to any particular cultural context because of that. Do you think that these are sort of universal things, or at least that we're dealing with generally in the West or in Europe, or do you think that they can be much more specific from culture to culture, or perhaps even specific to Romania?
I mean, I think there are nuances. I'm talking, I cannot generalize, because I have the experience of working with colleagues from maybe 5 or 6 different cultures, and we deliberately didn't want to place the film anywhere because we found ourselves very connected in certain areas, no matter the border. It's a borderless film in many, many respects. And it's also a film about borders, between me and you, between different cultures and stuff. So I think there are nuances, but at the core, there is a universal, let's say, challenge that we all deal with everywhere. And in that sense, I think it's symbolic that we all use this same language, which is a broken, imperfect English. Only Laura, which is of course of British origin, only she has maybe a correct grammar. And we had these discussions that we didn't want to translate grammatically correct in the subtitles because it wouldn't do justice to the reality of the film. We don't speak a correct English. Anyway, I divagate. So going back to the cultural diversity, at least in our side, because I didn't work with colleagues from Iran, from India, so it's true it's a very European film in that sense. We are very connected. And I just wanted, because we don't have much time now, but I want to open a sort of a treasure of information for you, if you are interested. Usually people don't stay up to the end of the film to see the credits, but on the credits you have several books and several specialists that we mention. And we created with the library, with the bookshop in Bucharest, which is called Cărturești, Touch Me Not bookshelf. And this bookshelf you find also Esther's book, but also other interesting books on these areas, which are basically destabilizing the fixed ideas the pre-constructed ideas that we grow up with, and they open a lot of new perspective on how people relate, on how people can live their sexuality.
Great. Do we have any questions from...
And they come from writers from different cultures, but they go around the same issues, talking about the multiculturality.
Yeah. Yeah. And who are the, so Esther Perel is on there, but who are the other writers?
It's one of them. I think it's also, it's Michael Bader, which is an American psychanalyst, wrote a book which was highly inspiring for us, which is called Arousal, The Secret Logic of Sexual Fantasies. Then you have some Romanian books, then from Editura 3, and then you have Franz Rupert, it's a German, who wrote about family constellations. Family constellations are an area which is very intriguing for me, and that continues to be fascinating. And we worked with some, for example, with some exercises from family constellation in the film without being specialist in any way, but we played with. So I think they have German, French, American, Belgian, Romanian authors talking about the multiculturality of this kind of knowledge.
Yeah. Questions from the audience? Do we have anyone?
No curiosity.
Sorry, here's one.
Hi, I was curious. What did the members of the communities that you worked with in Timișoara, how did they feel about the movie or the entire project?
So we have really high involvement from the communities, not only like conceptually or as ideas, but they help us practically. They kind of became co-producers of this project. So last night, for example, I give you just one side of the project. We work with a community of people with disabilities in Romania, and Motivation Foundation, it's an important partner on the road. And in Timișoara is Ceva de Spus. It's the local organization for persons with disabilities, which are also autonomous. They are like strong advocates for independent living, because it's a huge issue in Romania that people who are different and diagnosed with a certain condition, they have less chances in many areas of life, including work, education, and very often they end up in institutions. And it's a huge deal to secure this, the possibility to live independently and to have a job. And we brought Christian, I hope Christian is going to keep that travel like accessibility diary for Romania. We asked him to give his impression on how accessible is Romania during his road trips. And it's very challenging. Step by step, it's very challenging. So Universitatea de Vest din Timișoara, it's a very welcoming guest. They are very well organized. So in terms of accessibility, everything is perfect until the stage. So you cannot climb, if you are a person with disability, you cannot climb the stage. You have accessibility in all spaces, but not there. So the whole community, like their community in Timișoara, found solutions. You cannot travel with Tarom from Cluj to Timișoara because Christian has to go through a whole ordeal. He has to disassemble his whole chair, and he has a mammoth of a chair, and he has to disassemble it because it's a matter of national security. He has to be put down on a wooden plate, which is a very humiliating position for him. You know that he cannot stand. He stands with the support of the chair. So he has to be put down, and specialists from the check-in, they have to disassemble piece by piece that thing, and it takes 1 hour, and it's very humiliating, and it's very difficult because who knows, a bomb can hide in that chair. So then we had to find, together with the community, solutions to bring him from Timișoara to Cluj. And there will be again and again things, like for example with the Romanian national transport, the Romanian trains transport, they officially say we are an accessible means of transport. But actually, so you can get with Christian in the train in Bucharest, but if you want to get down in Brașov, there's no way. So you have to travel, you would have to travel all the way to go, to let the train have all the travel, go back to Bucharest, then bring poor Christian out of the train. So it's a whole, how do you say, odyssey, practical stuff. And believe me, we never thought of being activists in any way. So we are trying to do our job. We are a team which is passionate about filmmaking, but you become an activist in the sense that activism, it's about common sense. It's about respecting the person next to you. So it's a process. In that sense, maybe it's transformative in the way that you bring awareness about some really like daily life issues, about respecting the other, about respecting the personal space. It's about respect, I think. Christian said at one point that this experience, it's mainly about respecting each other, and it's about freedom. Others respecting your personal freedom. Concretely. There are many stories. I hope we put them on. We have a page which is called Touch Me Not Film page, where you will find gradually these stories if we have enough hands to introduce the information.
We have a question over here.
I saw the movie, and it was recommended to me by a very dear friend who said, I haven't seen it because it's a very hard-to-watch movie.
Oh, you think so?
That's what she told me when she recommended it to me, and I really wanted it. That made me want it even more to see it, and I loved it. And my question, because it's a very powerful movie, and maybe it is indeed a hard-to-watch movie, my question is, do you have stories of people who perhaps after watching it, something changed, or they started expressing their sexuality more, or, I don't know, process their traumas around sexuality, or whatever? I mean, the movie, you know, gives enough space to touch different people and different, I don't know, perceptions about sexuality.
I think as far as the feedback comes to us, there are many powerful stories that came our way. You never know, I mean, as we talked about the degrees of liberation, you never know how it works for each person. But we had some, let's say, tips of icebergs that reached us. Like, for example, there was a lady in Cluj when we had the premiere in Romania. And anyway, the premiere, it's always a crazy time. So I was on my way to toilet trying to withdraw from everybody, and there is this lady in her 50s, and she comes to me with the very emotional, with lacrimi în ochi, și îmi spune, and she tells me, I cannot speak, she touches me like that, I cannot speak, I am Laura. And then she goes, and I told her, come and speak to Laura, because we had a debate in Cluj-Napoca a year ago, and apparently she came, I didn't see her. But 1 year later, when we were preparing this university tour, we are in a cafe talking with the German Cultural Institute, one of the partners in Cluj. And there is this lady which I didn't recognize immediately, and she comes to me and she said, oh my God, and then she runs away. And I said, what did I do? And then she comes back and she says, excuse me, forgive me, I had a very emotional reaction. You remember, I am the lady that came to you and said, I'm Laura. And you know what happened this past year? I entered into a course of holotropic breathing, and I started to go to therapy, and I did a lot of things, and she told me a bit about how her life gradually changed, because the film gave her the courage to experience, to try things, in the sense that it's very important to go into safe spaces that can help you share stuff. And she said, I would have never been able to ask you questions in public about that. But the books that I saw on the credits, and also the ideas that Laura talked about, helped me a lot. I don't know where the journey goes. I am just sharing with you a little sample. And we had also another stories, and I will stay to those two stories. We had a woman which was incredibly angry at me, in particular, at the filmmaker, that we exploited the poor people with disabilities, especially their sexual life, because in the film it's about, for the people who haven't seen the film deals also with the intimacy of persons with disability, with differently able bodies, and one of the hearts of the film, it's Christian and his wife, Grit, who share with us a lot of areas of their life. And in that point, Christian said, that's not your question, this is my question. And he explained how important for him was to make this film, to be able to share with the viewers that actually, and he is an activist, he is like a declared activist 10 years before we started to work together for the film. And for him it was very important to share with an audience that the people with differently able bodies have the same right to exist as sexual beings, and they have the same right to relationships, to intimacy as everybody else. So there are, and after the discussion that he had with the woman, they stayed very good friends. I was anyway out of the equation, so she was not interested in me anymore after that. They would talk directly, and I think that's the beauty of the process, these encounters.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Adina. I'm afraid
that's
all we've got time for, I'm afraid. But it's great to hear actually how the film and the project from it has actually sort of touched people and affected them in their own lives.
For the people who haven't yet met the protagonists, maybe you've seen the film, but if you haven't met them and you want to talk to them, they will be in Bucharest on the 3rd and on the 8th at Teatrul Național București.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.